Right. Hey, all you wondrous ones out there. Darren Nelson Hall here with another Wisdom Warrior transmission, coming to you from beautiful home space here in Costa Rica, Templo Lila. And wanted to check in on a few things that have been coming up for me. It feels like we're in eclipse season right now, and there's just like portal after portal of profound information coming through and profound understandings that are starting to really emerge in our collective right now. And what an amazing time to be alive. I mean, what an amazing time to really witness just how extraordinary the understanding is of our reality on so many different levels. And if you're not aware, the word apocalypse doesn't mean the end of the world. It actually means a time of great revealing. And we are in that right now in such a profound way. And we're witnessing right now the reclaiming of true authority on the planet. We are witnessing the reclaiming of Gnosticism, of self-realization of each and every single human being coming into their sovereignty as their own discoverers of truth. And people are turning off the news. The mainstream media is mortally wounded right now. I do believe in some lightness, because Joe Rogan is a character of somewhat, levity. He plays this kind of interesting balance between the holy fool and the sage king. And his whole debacle that happened over CNN and his, own holistic medicine treatment of COVID really dealt a mortal wound to CNN and mainstream media. And I think it awoke a lot of people who weren't yet in realization that the mass media is a tool of mass deception. And I think recent allegations that have come out as well that Andrew Cuomo, his brother Chris Cuomo, who's a host for CNN, was using his powers at CNN to really dig in dirt on the victims of his brother's sexual perpetrations. Just another blow. And last month, I believe CNN, for the first time ever, had less than 1 million viewers on any of their shows. These are causes for huge celebration. I'm a former student of media, and my media studies really informed me how we do live in an extraordinary matrix system of information, and the mind control, the social engineering of human consciousness is so deep and elaborate, and there's been billions and trillions of dollars spent for over the last 100 years to really use the media, and that means television, radio, movies, to basically cage human consciousness and mold it in a certain way to fit into the system that we live in, the system of civilization. And with that, there's also this deep mode of authoritarianism that we're now witnessing, like in the full-fledged appearance, in how governments around the world are starting to weaponize their political powers against human rights and the freedoms of the people over the cause of the pandemic. And I think it's becoming increasingly obvious to every citizen that something just doesn't add up. Something is not right, and it just gets more and more and more and more absurd. I've always loved the analogy of wrestling. It's almost like the universe is putting us in more and more wrestling moves, saying, "Do you got it? No? Okay. You got it? No?" And whether it's just, the evidence that the vaccines do not stop transmission of COVID, and yet we're still just rolling them out as if they're like the savior of the whole thing. Or it's the scientists being mystified, as the headlines went, over what's happening in Africa, where you have such a low vaccination rate. I think there's only like 6 or 10% of the population vaccinated, and yet they've had no huge crisis with COVID as was predicted. And then you're seeing new studies that came out that show that Florida, a state in America that did nothing pretty much as far as mandates with COVID, did better off than states that did tremendous draconian measures to shut this thing down. And I think a lot more people are waking up. I think obviously people have dug in their heels on certain positions. I mean, we've all been there when, being proven wrong about something is not fun. Um, but, we have to be self-effacing here. We have to be humble and realize that I think the ruse is really being shown up. And that's not to diminish the fact that there is obviously a virus going around. I've had it. Many of my friends have had it. But the means to treat it are a lot more available than we think. And there's lots of integrative methods that we can do there. And it doesn't have to be all about like this, all or nothing choice between being vaccinated and what have you. And it's amazing. I'm seeing more and more people who have been vaccinated. I was just in an amazing training over the last 2 weekends, and there were some vax people there, and they're just totally open-minded. They're just like, yeah, it was my choice, and you have a choice too. And you're witnessing that the nimbleness and the flexibility that's really needed for human consciousness right now is being embodied and activated. But what I really want to elaborate on in this Wisdom Warrior talk is that something that I'm starting to realize is that we are conditioned in Western civilization in a subtle authoritarianism system. If you look back on our education system, how we're indoctrinated from a young age to sit in our chairs and kind of just regurgitate information that's given to us, it's not an education system that really prizes creativity, human sovereignty, and really focusing on individuation, like looking at where the unique eccentric gifts of every single student and really enthusing those so that everyone can be on their true medicine path of their destiny. It's really a system that's built to really construct workers to pretty much comprise the capitalist state, enslaving us in this kind of worker drone mentality. And you see that in society with the swaths of status quo, these thought forms, these groupthinks that are really generated by the media over tremendous duress and peer pressure for everyone to fit in to these thought forms. And this is something that's been driven at us for years and years and years, so that when something like a pandemic happens where you have tremendous powers of corporatism and politics exploiting a pandemic to gain further riches, to buy up more property, more land, to exploit it to diminish freedoms and rights that are way, 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 way beyond what is the reality of the situation of the pandemic. And then you see huge, immense numbers of humanity just saying, yes, man, yes, and just going along with it. You start to see that this is all like a big setup. And then on top of that, I find it really interesting that right now we have this Ghislaine Maxwell trial happening, although you would hardly know about it. And I think it's interesting to look at the contrast of the Kyle Rittenhouse trial and whatever you think about that, just in the general sense of how much the media gave attention to that trial, which in itself was a controversial and important trial. But now you have the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, which in my mind is exponentially, infinitely more important, way more important. This is probably the most important trial, I would think, of modern human existence. When you look at what it's contextualizing with a global network of human and child trafficking, that a lot of the leaders that we look up to institute this kind of authoritarian system to drive our nationhoods, our culture towards some kind of harmonious governing structure that we call civilization, that a lot of these individuals have been compromised, have been involved in the most heinous crimes that we can imagine. You start to witness that, wow, there's just another dimension to the authoritarianism, in the sense that a lot of these leaders have set up a whole system where they can get away with it because they can create all these smoke screens in the media, and then they create this fear that we should not, confront them. But they're playing a very dangerous game, because when you start to mess with people's children, as we found with the Vatican, you start to awaken mama bears and papa bears, and humans, they get very upset, and people are pushing back, and people are starting to realize, my God, we've been really exploited in the most heinous ways. And of course, you can look no further than the crimes of colonialism with what indigenous people have gone through, and they're really like the canaries in the coal mine, especially what's been shaking my home country of Canada, my native country of Canada, where you have all these mass graves being discovered from the residential school system. you're starting to realize that there is this tremendous dark authoritarianism of the most disgusting kind that's been sort of rooted in our species, in our collective. And we don't want to fall into the projection of them. I've already used the word they quite a bit, and that's a bit of a red flag for myself, because at the end of the day, the change is only going to come from within us. We have to look into ourselves and look at how can we counter these infected states of moral degradation. How have we been culpable in also supporting them, and how can we start to dismantle them, dismantle these authoritarian systems that are really built on the premise of keeping us so small, so belittled, so diminished that we won't do anything about it. And more all over the world, people are starting to do something about it. People are gathering in droves. And I would suggest that the whole COVID pandemic, in some way, because we're also in an age, as we enter into the Aquarian age and the multi-dimensions, screw the metaverse, the multiverse, which is actually the real texture of reality. It's multi-dimensional, right? So what's exciting about that is there's more than one truth at the same time happening here. So on one level, yes, there's a pandemic, there's an actual respiratory virus going around and it's harming humanity. But on another level, this whole thing is being exploited by governments, corporations alike. And then on another level, that exploitation is actually awakening people. It's a tremendous opportunity to witness the grandest duplicity, corruption that we've ever witnessed as a species. And if anything, that should be profound motivation to get our shit together and to rise up in our sovereignty and say, you know what, enough is enough. We need to break away and start to create our own systems, our own cultures, our own civilizations, because we've been set up in this authoritarian system where we're just constantly waiting, giving our power to these would-be leaders to figure something out. And then they're kind of just spitting in our faces when we see like Jeff Bezos and these people like flying off to the moon and doing these like space fun expeditions while the world is burning. I think it's just so clear right now, and that's amazing because I think it's waking people up. Now, the next stage of that would be, okay, you've been given this tremendous red pill. You have been woken up. Like, now what? And that's where I think people have to start getting together and realizing, hey, we are our own systems of government. We can create our own governing bodies. It starts with yourself, being in self-governance of yourself, being what I call, or what has been called, a Gnostic, a self-realized being, realizing that you can meditate, you can contemplate, that you have a compass of intuitive truth, of omnipotent intelligence in your heart, and you can go out and be sovereign over your own mind. You can make up your own beliefs about the world. You can do your own research. Like, that isn't a bad phrase. Do your own. In fact, you should be doing your own research. And then you should be checking that with your community, engaging in philosophical conversations, sharpening the swords of your debating skills, having really good conversations, discussions, respectfully, of course, and start to realize that truth is teamwork. We need to start making the new meaning of the world together, because trust me, the meaning that's promulgated through the media is bullshit, and we're all realizing that. So it's exciting because we get to now recreate the meaning of the world, and there's so much profundity in that, and fun, like profundity, like lots of fun to be had in that. And then from there, I think it's time for us to get really, really bold. Something that I've been inspired by for over a decade now is eco-villages. And I've been traveling around the world checking these places out, like seeing that these amazing human beings who have had enough courage and bravery to say, enough's enough. I'm not going to wait for these leaders. I see through this bullshit. I'm going to break away and start building my own civilization, my own culture, my own society, my own village, even just my own freaking home and family, following, my own dictums of what that should look like. They say in the Landmark Forum, I haven't done it, but families are what saves the world, and if you look at how the media is positioned and weaponized us, it's degrading all these networks of communities, degrading the families, degrading even our identities, with all the wishy-washy stuff that we're fed these days about, like, what is a man, what is a woman, all the confusing things around culture. They're constantly just trying to keep us off of our game, so we're very confused all the time. We're not standing in our strength and figuring out. And we got to shut all that down and start to really come into like a phase. I almost see humanity going through this collective phase of just like being stoic and going and retreating into nature and realizing that nature is actually the wisdom teacher, the true teacher of humanity, as the indigenous has said. And it would be good for us to go through a phase, which I think happened during the lockdown for some of us, where we just spend a lot more time in nature, meditating in nature with our family, with our friends, and start to like just repair and regenerate this whole notion of just being a sovereign thinking human being ourselves, and also just getting in touch with the wisdom insights that come with nature. The real news, the real mainstream news is Mother Earth. She's speaking to us, she's communicating to us. She is literally the wisdom goddess. She was called Sophia for a reason. It means the goddess of wisdom. Philo, Sophia, lover of wisdom. That's what philosophy is really about. It means loving your nature deep enough that you understand that it's constantly bubbling up revelations. And for a human being who is in touch with that, who meditates, who contemplates, reflects, is in touch with the fact that they have spontaneous insights guiding them all the time, that's like, whew, every human being needs to have that kind of training to realize you have your own internal guidance system. And then the beauty of just working with other like-minded, like-hearted human beings to then guide, the creation of culture together is really profound. And there's a lot of muscles that have been atrophied in that. I'm in a project right now in Costa Rica. We're starting to build an institute around eco-spirituality that will have an eco-village attached to it. And already right off the bat, it's like, okay, how are we going to do, communication skills work when inevitable conflicts will start? Because we're all coming from a culture where we've been maybe too inflationary in the ego sphere. We have been bred in a sort of subtle narcissistic tendency. We haven't worked together to like make the world. We've relegated our authority to political powers to do that. And we've just lived in these kind of like lovely, like convenient lifestyles that have been like kind of trickery and its incomfortability. And now we're like pushing back, and it's like, okay, well, it's going to entail us then coming together and doing some really graduated work into community building. That's why I was just down south in Costa Rica doing level 1 and 2 of the authentic relating training, learning how to speak and communicate in authentic ways to my fellow humans so that we can really learn how to respectfully co-create, because that's a really important thing right now. And so it's really time for us to think about this. How can we start to generate our own cultures and eco-villages and eventually, hopefully, some kind of grand enlightened civilization. But let's not get too grandiose. Maybe that's my own narcissism speaking. It's time to just start subtly. And, the things that we can do right now is start to look into your life. Where do you give away your authority? And how can you reclaim that? How can you start to reclaim and start to think for yourself? And then how can you actually start to maybe co-create with the people around you a new form of culture? Because I think it's becoming very, very devastatingly clear that the world as it is set up, is just going in a whole other direction that is not very, that is not good. It's not good. It's not good for the children, especially. When you start to see children being harmed, that should be a wake-up call for all of us. And that's been happening already through sexual abuse, through all these child trafficking networks. But now it's becoming front and centered with a vaccine, vaccinating the children. And they can't, and I say that the people who've chosen to be in these elitist roles, they're trying to, keep this truth down so that we don't see it, but it's just popping up like a geyser everywhere, which is a sign that the awakening of human consciousness is just ripping apart this rampart system of mind control. It's our destiny, to overcome all of this. This has been prophesied in ancient prophecies the world over, that there would come a time when there would be these tyrannies that we would kind of affect onto ourselves. And due to the fact that there's a tremendous part of our species that has been fractured and traumatized, and we would dismantle that. And it doesn't have to be in a violent way. In fact, it's going to be this very spiritual, graceful, organic way by reassessing our beliefs, doing spiritual practices, going back to nature, and having this new spiral dynamic where we build new earth communities that don't necessarily have to regress back to the point where we're Luddites and not using technology, but using technologies in enlightened ways, and also realizing the crazy advanced technology that is nature. And I did a wisdom chat recently about the metaverse where I go into that you can check out. So I think that's all I wanted to say today, but just things that have been coming up for me. It's an amazing thing. I'm seeing that all these dots are starting to connect. Everything's related. The Ghislaine Maxwell trial, what's happening with the pandemic, the vaccines, the education system. Wow, you name it. It's amazing to see the unified understanding that is happening right now on the planet, and it's amazing to witness this great awakening of human consciousness. And we are geniuses. It's just amazing when you start to see what's happening all over the planet right now, when people start to educate themselves all this brilliance starts to come to the fore. So I'm really, really excited about the times that we're in. They are harrowing. I think they're going to get more and more challenging, but we want that challenge because honestly, we have so much latent strength and power that has been untapped because of the way the subtle authoritarian system has been enacted for centuries, if not millennia, keeping us down, keeping us stagnant. And now we're rising up so powerfully. And I think there's going to be some positive changes that are going to happen, like phoenixes rising from the ashes so fast, so immediately, which was also prophesied, that we would overcome these tyrannies so fast that in 1 or 2 generations we would hardly even remember them because we'd be so busy building these beautiful, enlightened civilizations. So really, really excited to be here with you all in the sacred solidarity. I hope you're finding ways to just, keep your chin up as we further into this dark night of the soul. Tremendous opportunities for growth, and it's an honor to be here on planet Earth, Mama Gaia, right now as we make this leap with all of you. We got to do it together. We can't go it alone. So I'll keep you in the loop on all the projects we got here down in Costa Rica. Lots of magic happening. Wherever you are, I hope you're well. Hope you're fiercely loving. And I'll see you on the next Wisdom Warrior transmission. Be glorious.